You wake before you know you are awake. Not suddenly, not pulled from sleep by urgency, but eased upward by a change in the room. The darkness has thinned. It has not vanished, just loosened its grip. Somewhere beyond the wall, a bird makes a sound that is not quite a song yet. It is testing the morning the way you are. There is no clock to consult, no glowing face waiting to tell you what to do next. Time arrives indirectly here, announced through light and sound and habit. You sense it rather than measure it. The pale gray at the window suggests it may be near dawn, or perhaps only pretending to be. Early modern mornings often behaved like this, stretching themselves out slowly as if reluctant to begin. You remain still for a moment, listening. Wood settles. Someone shifts on a mattress nearby. The room smells faintly of last night's fire, cold ash, a trace of smoke trapped in fabric and hair. These smells linger because nothing is sealed tightly. Floors breathe. Walls whisper. Even sleep feels shared with the building itself. Eventually, a bell sounds. It is distant, not loud, but confident. It does not rush. Church bells in early modern towns were not alarms in the modern sense. They were anchors. One bell for the first prayer of the day, another later for work, another for a market opening. One well-known historical fact is that in many European towns between the 16th and 18th centuries, bells were the primary system of timekeeping for entire communities, replacing personal clocks for most people. You did not own time so much as borrow it when the bell allowed. You sit up slowly. The floor is cool. Shoes wait where they were left, not because they were placed carefully, but because there is nowhere else for them to go. Space is limited. Order emerges from repetition, not from design. You know where everything is because it has always been there. As you dress, the light strengthens just enough to show the grain in the wooden table. The same table used for eating, mending, writing, and sometimes sleeping, depending on who is visiting. Multi-purpose objects are common here. Nothing wants to be idle. An obscure detail slips quietly into the morning. Many early modern households began the day without immediately lighting a fire, even in colder months. Fuel was expensive, and rekindling embers too early was considered wasteful. So the first part of the morning is lived in partial cold, wrapped in yesterday's warmth, moving gently to conserve it. Historians still argue whether this habitual restraint shaped a cultural patience, or whether patience simply made the restraint bearable. You move carefully, not from fear of waking others, but from a shared understanding that mornings do not like to be startled. Outside, the street is already awake in its own restrained way, not bustling, not quiet, a soft middle state. Someone sweeps yesterday's dust into a new pile. Someone else empties a chamber pot with practiced aim. These acts are neither hidden nor discussed. They belong to the same category as breathing. The sky remains undecided. Clouds hold the light like folded linen. The sun will arrive when it feels ready. You accept this without frustration. There is nothing to check, nothing to optimize. The bell will sound again when the next portion of the day is meant to begin. Psychologically, this does something subtle. When time is external, owned by bells, light, and routine, your mind does not carry it as a burden. You do not worry about being late in the abstract. You are either present for the bell or you are not. Anxiety has fewer hiding places when the future is not constantly counted. You walk a little further. A bakery door opens. The smell of bread emerges like a promise that does not need to be fulfilled immediately. Baking begins early because ovens take time to warm, and because bread must be ready when people are, not the other way around. In some towns, bakers were fined if their loaves were late, an oddly communal expectation placed on warmth and hunger alike. Another bell rings, closer this time. You recognize it without thinking. It belongs to this place. Each bell has a personality, shaped by its metal, its height, its age. People here can tell which bell is speaking even when half asleep. This familiarity reduces choice, but it increases certainty. The day will unfold in its usual order. Deviations are rare enough to be noticed, but common enough to be absorbed. An unusual detail passes quietly through the morning. Some early modern towns experimented with silent hours, where bells were intentionally not rung to avoid overstimulation. Records from parts of Germany and Italy suggest complaints about bell fatigue long before the phrase existed. Historians still argue whether these pauses were practical or psychological, but the result was the same: a sanctioned quiet that felt earned rather than imposed. You stop near a doorway. Someone stands there already waiting. Waiting is not uncomfortable here. It is a recognized activity. You wait for the shop to open. You wait for the bell. You wait for light to finish becoming light. There is no sense that waiting is wasted time. It is simply time behaving differently. The air is cool but steady. You notice how the absence of precise minutes creates a softness around responsibility. Tasks exist, but they do not chase you. They line up politely. This does not make life easier. Early modern life is physically demanding, but it does make it quieter inside the head. Urgency is shared by the group, not carried alone. A child passes carrying something too heavy, moving carefully, unbothered by the effort. Work begins early for many, not because it must, but because it has always done so. Habit, when repeated over generations, begins to feel like nature. The bell sounds again. This one means it is time to begin what you begin. You do not question it. You simply turn and move in the direction your body already expects. The morning has shaped itself around you without instruction. As you walk, the light finally settles. The sky chooses a color and keeps it. The day has started, not suddenly but completely. You feel no urge to rush ahead of it. And without noticing exactly when, you are fully awake, standing inside a morning that has been awake for a long time already, patiently waiting for you to catch up. You do not sleep alone. This is not a statement of intimacy exactly. It is a statement of arrangement. Night here is a shared resource like water or fire. Beds are wide when they exist at all and narrow when they do not. Bodies are placed where they fit. Sleep finds you wherever it can. You lie down while the room is still murmuring. Someone coughs softly. Someone turns, the straw mattress responding with a low, patient sound. The air holds warmth longer than expected because warmth is collective. Blankets overlap. Breath gathers. The room feels full, not crowded. In early modern households, it was common for entire families, and sometimes apprentices, servants, or travelers, to sleep in the same chamber. One well-known historical fact is that even relatively prosperous homes often had only one heated sleeping room, making shared sleep practical rather than symbolic. Privacy, as a nightly expectation, had not yet fully arrived. You stare into the dark. The ceiling disappears quickly. Shadows merge. The distinction between one sleeper and another becomes less precise. Someone's foot brushes yours accidentally. No one apologizes. This contact carries no meaning beyond confirmation. Others are here. An obscure detail drifts into the darkness. Historical records show that people frequently slept in shifts. First sleep and second sleep were recognized phases, separated by a quiet waking period near midnight. During this interval, people prayed, talked softly, or simply lay awake, thinking without urgency. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was biological or cultural, but it shaped nights into something looser, less final. You feel your eyes grow heavy. The mind does not resist sleep here in the same way. Darkness is complete enough to be persuasive. No artificial light hums. No clock glows. Night does not compete for attention. It envelops it. When you close your eyes, the world does not disappear. It simply rearranges itself. Someone nearby whispers, "It is not meant for you." It is not meant to be hidden either. Conversations at night drift openly, half-formed. Words are exchanged the way breaths are. They do not demand replies. Silence resumes naturally afterward without explanation. Psychologically, this shared night does something quietly stabilizing. When sleep is communal, vigilance is distributed. You do not feel responsible for listening to every sound. If something unusual happens, many ears will notice. This allows the mind to loosen its grip. Anxiety, when present, becomes diluted. You shift slightly. The mattress responds. The room exhales. These small confirmations reassure you that movement is allowed, that rest is not fragile. Modern sleep often demands stillness. This sleep tolerates adjustment. It understands the body as it is. A well-known quirk of early modern life appears in the darkness. Beds were often shared not just with people, but with objects. Tools, clothing, books, and sometimes animals occupied the same space. A dog sleeps near the foot of the bed, not as a pet in the modern sense, but as warmth and alertness combined. Cats come and go freely, their presence noted only by the subtle shift of weight. Someone snores rhythmically. No one is annoyed. Snoring is simply another sound that confirms sleep is occurring successfully. Silence would be more concerning. Silence suggests absence. Sound suggests continuity. During the midnight waking, you open your eyes, not fully awake, not fully asleep. The room is dim but familiar. Someone sits up nearby, murmuring a prayer or counting quietly. Another drinks water. The waking period is not disruptive. It is expected. There is no effort to fall back asleep immediately. Time is wide enough to allow drifting. An obscure historical note settles gently. In some regions, people use this waking interval for storytelling or even visiting neighbors, knocking softly at doors without surprise. Night, while darker, was not entirely private or closed. Historians still argue whether this increased social cohesion or simply reflected necessity, but it suggests that rest and interaction were not opposites. You lie still. Thoughts pass without urgency. Tomorrow exists, but only faintly. The body understands that it has already rested once tonight. There is no fear of failing at sleep. Sleep will return when it chooses to. Eventually, it does. Second sleep arrives quietly, like a familiar friend returning to finish a conversation. You sink again into the mattress. The room settles once more. The shared breathing becomes slower. Morning will arrive gradually, announced by the same light and sound as before. Nothing will end sharply. Night does not demand closure, it dissolves. As you drift, you notice how the absence of solitude removes a certain pressure. There is no performance of rest. You are not required to sleep well or deeply. You are simply allowed to be horizontal among others doing the same. The last thought before sleep is not a thought at all, but a sensation. The reassuring knowledge that if you were to wake suddenly, you would not wake alone. You eat what appears. Not because you are indifferent, but because meals arrive the same way days do here, by pattern rather than preference. The table is already set when you enter the room, not with ceremony, but with inevitability. Bowls have been placed where bowls always go. Bread rests where hands expect it. The light is still soft. Morning has not fully sharpened yet, and the room seems to agree that this is not the moment for strong opinions. The meal smells familiar before you see it. Gruel, bread, perhaps a small portion of cheese if the week has been generous. Nothing is announced. You sit when there is space. One well-known historical fact fits quietly into the scene. In early modern Europe, most people ate the same meals day after day, with very little variation. Seasonal changes mattered more than individual desire. Breakfasts were often minimal, sometimes nothing more than bread and small beer, which was safer than water and weak enough to drink without ceremony. You tear the bread slowly. It resists just enough to remind you that it is real. The crust flakes onto the table. No one minds. Tables here are used to evidence. You dip the bread into the bowl without hesitation. Everyone does. Conversation, if it happens, floats above the meal rather than interrupting it. Eating does not require commentary. There is no pressure to react, to praise, to compare. The food is not trying to impress you. It is trying to repeat itself successfully. An obscure detail slides into the moment. Spices were known and available, but rarely used in everyday cooking, not only because of cost, but because strong flavors were believed to disturb bodily balance. Blandness was considered stabilizing. Historians still argue whether this belief came from medical theory or simple habit, but the result was the same: meals designed to soothe rather than excite. You notice how slowly everyone eats, not ceremonially, just without hurry. There is nowhere else to be. Work will begin when the bell allows it. Until then, chewing has its own pace. You feel no need to finish quickly. No one watches your plate. Psychologically, this repetition does something gentle. When meals are predictable, the mind stops scanning for alternatives. Choice recedes. The body relaxes into expectation. Hunger becomes a known rhythm rather than an emergency. Someone pours more liquid into your cup. You do not ask. You nod slightly. The drink is warm, faintly bitter, not meant to be savored. It is meant to be reliable. Small beer, common across much of early modern life, was consumed by adults and children alike. Its low alcohol content made it safer than untreated water and familiar enough to feel neutral. You swallow without thinking. Across the table, someone eats in silence. Another hums almost unconsciously. Meals are not social performances here. They are maintenance. A well-known but often overlooked fact drifts into the room. Forks were not yet universally used. Many people ate with knives, spoons, or hands. This was not seen as crude, it was practical. Food arrived in forms meant to be managed this way. Cleanliness was situational rather than absolute. An obscure quirk follows it. Napkins, when they existed, were sometimes communal. A length of cloth passed from hand to hand, wiped, folded, reused. Historians still argue whether this was born of scarcity or simply a different understanding of hygiene, but no one at the table seems unsettled by it. You finish when you finish. No one signals the end. Plates are cleared gradually, one by one, as people drift back into motion. The meal dissolves instead of concluding. Someone stands. Someone else remains seated a moment longer, finishing the last bite without apology. The room shifts back into usefulness. Bowls are rinsed quickly. Water splashes onto the floor without concern. A cat appears, investigating crumbs with professional interest. The smell of food fades, replaced by the familiar scent of wood and damp stone. You feel steadied, not energized exactly, but anchored. The predictability of the meal has placed you back inside the day. There is comfort in knowing that tomorrow's meal will be similar, and the next day's too. Novelty is not required to feel fed. As you step away from the table, you realize that eating here does not interrupt life. It simply flows through it, like a pause that does not demand attention. The bell has not rung yet. There is still time before the next portion of the day begins, and you carry the quiet satisfaction of a meal that asked nothing of you except that you accept it. You dress without deciding. The clothing is already waiting, folded the way it was folded last night, creased by habit rather than intention. You recognize each piece by weight and texture before you fully see it. Wool mostly, linen beneath. Fabrics chosen not for expression but for endurance. The light has grown firmer now. It reaches into the room and settles on the clothes as if approving them. Nothing here surprises the day. You pull a sleeve over your arm, feeling the familiar resistance at the elbow where the fabric has learned your shape. Clothing in early modern life does this. It remembers. One well-known historical fact rests easily in the act of dressing. Most people own very few garments. A working individual might have one good outfit for public occasions and one set for daily labor, repaired repeatedly until the cloth could no longer agree to exist. Clothing was valuable, not disposable, and change arrived slowly, if at all. You tie what needs tying. Buttons are fewer than you might expect. Laces and pins do most of the work. The motions are practiced enough that your hands move without instruction. You could dress in near darkness, and often do. There is no mirror nearby. Even when mirrors exist, they are small and expensive, offering only fragments of the self. An obscure detail slips into the moment. Garments were frequently shared across family members, altered temporarily with pins or stitches to fit the wearer of the day. Clothes were less personal property than communal tools. Historians still argue whether this reduced individuality or simply defined it differently, but the body adapted either way. You adjust your collar. It never sits perfectly. No collar ever does. This does not bother you. Comfort here is negotiated, not perfected. Slight irritation is expected. It fades once you stop noticing it. Psychologically, this constancy performs a quiet service. When your outward appearance changes little from day to day, the mind spends less energy maintaining an image. You are not required to invent yourself each morning. Identity arrives pre-assembled, reinforced by repetition. You step outside. Others look much like you. Not identical, but recognizably aligned. Colors repeat across the street. Browns, grays, muted blues softened by wear. Bright colors exist, but they signal occasion rather than preference. Everyday life prefers understatement. A well-known but often unnoticed fact passes with the crowd. Sumptuary laws once regulated what people could wear based on class or profession. Silk, certain dyes, specific cuts, these were legally restricted. Clothing was a visible map of social order. You did not have to ask who someone was. Their sleeves often told you. An obscure quirk follows close behind. Despite these laws, people frequently bent them. Extra trim hidden on the inside. A forbidden color dulled just enough to avoid attention. Historians still argue whether this was rebellion or quiet pragmatism, but it reveals a soft negotiation between rule and comfort. You walk. The fabric moves with you, not against you. It has learned the rhythm of your steps. A tear near the hem has been mended so many times that the stitching forms a pattern of its own. This repair does not embarrass you. It reassures you. It proves continuity. The day proceeds around you. Work happens. Tasks repeat. The clothes absorb it all: dust, warmth, effort. By midday, they smell faintly of use. This scent is not unpleasant. It belongs to the day. When you pause, leaning briefly against a wall, you feel the familiar pressure of the garment at your shoulders. It holds you lightly. Clothing here does not frame the body, it contains it. As the afternoon lengthens, you stop noticing what you are wearing altogether. This, perhaps, is its greatest success. When the outer layer becomes predictable, attention drifts inward, then outward again without resistance. By the time the light begins to soften, the clothes are no longer new, but they were never meant to be. They have done their work quietly. And as you move toward evening, wrapped in the same familiar fabric, you carry with you the subtle ease of a self that did not need to be chosen today. It simply continued. You notice the street before you notice the people. It announces itself through scent first. Damp stone, old wood, a trace of smoke that never quite leaves. The smell is not sharp, not overwhelming, just present, layered from years of use. It settles into the day the way dust settles into corners without effort. The street is narrow. Buildings lean slightly toward one another as if sharing a long conversation. Upper floors extend outward, making the sky feel closer than it is. Light reaches the ground in angled fragments, shifting slowly as the sun moves. You step carefully, not to avoid anything in particular, but because the surface asks for attention. One well-known historical fact fits naturally here. Early modern streets were rarely paved in the way you might expect. Many were a mixture of packed earth, stone, straw, and whatever else happened to remain after daily activity. Cleanliness existed, but it was relative. Streets were working spaces, not corridors. You walk at a measured pace. Someone passes with a basket. Someone else stops abruptly, creating a small pause that everyone adjusts around without complaint. Movement here is cooperative rather than efficient. You sense when to slow, when to continue. No signals are needed. An obscure detail drifts in with the air. In many towns, certain smells were actually welcomed. Tanners, bakers, brewers, each produced distinct scents that signaled productivity and stability. A street that smelled strongly of work was considered healthy. Historians still argue whether this association was cultural conditioning or practical reassurance, but the absence of smell often caused more concern than its presence. You breathe in without thinking. The body adapts quickly. What might seem unpleasant to an outsider becomes background information. Familiarity dulls edges. The nose learns what can be ignored. Psychologically, this creates a quiet grounding. When the environment announces itself consistently, the mind stops scanning for threats. The street smells the same today as it did yesterday. This predictability suggests safety, even if logic might disagree. You step aside to let a cart pass. Its wheels complain softly against stone. The sound echoes briefly, then fades. Nothing here is soundproof. Everything shares itself. Privacy, like silence, is partial and temporary. A well-known but rarely emphasized fact moves past you with the cart. Animal traffic was constant. Horses, donkeys, pigs, and chickens all contributed to the rhythm of the street. Their presence was not chaotic, it was expected. You watch where you step, not with alarm but with routine awareness. An obscure quirk follows. Some towns assigned specific streets to specific trades not only for organization, but for smell management. Strong odors were grouped together, allowing residents to predict sensory changes as they moved through the town. Historians still argue whether this was urban planning or simple habit, but it created a map you could follow with your eyes closed. You pause near a doorway. The wood is worn smooth at hand height, polished by centuries of passing palms. You rest your fingers there briefly. The surface is warm despite the cool air. Countless hands have left their heat behind. The street continues to murmur. Voices overlap without colliding. Laughter appears, then disappears. No one raises their voice unnecessarily. Sound travels easily here. You become aware of how gently people speak, as if mindful that words linger. As afternoon tilts toward evening, the smells shift slightly. Cooking begins. Smoke grows sweeter. The street exhales the day and prepares for night. You move on, carrying these quiet sensations with you. Nothing demands reaction. Nothing insists on being fixed. The street exists as it is, shaped by use rather than intention. And as you walk through it, you realize how much comfort can be found in a place that does not try to hide its own history. The ground under your feet is uneven, but it is familiar. That familiarity steadies your steps as the light continues its slow descent. You wait, not because you are idle, but because waiting is its own rhythm here. The day moves slowly, punctuated by bells and footsteps rather than clocks or messages. You find yourself pausing in doorways, in narrow alleys, along worn stone walls. Waiting is less an inconvenience and more a natural state. The air hums softly with activity that is neither urgent nor absent. You hear the scrape of a broom in the distance, the muted thump of a leather shoe against cobblestones, the faint chatter of a voice carried just far enough to remain private. You inhale. You exhale. Time stretches without your interference. One well-known historical fact: in early modern towns, much of life depended on waiting. Craftsmen queued for deliveries of materials. Merchants waited for customers. Apprentices waited for instructions. And townspeople waited for public announcements. Waiting was embedded in daily life, not a product of boredom. You notice, almost unconsciously, how waiting allows the mind to slow. Without constant action, your thoughts are free to drift. You observe small details you might otherwise overlook. The way light slants across a doorway, the particular curve of a roof tile, the pattern of straw in a cart. An obscure detail surfaces quietly. Some guilds and municipal offices had designated waiting areas for citizens, complete with benches or sheltered corners. They were not just functional but social. People exchanged brief remarks, stories, or gossip while standing in line. Historians still argue whether these spaces were designed for order or for quiet psychological control, but they offered moments of shared calm. You shift your weight slightly. There is no urgency here. The day has been teaching you that not every moment needs filling. Waiting is not empty. It has texture, sound, and even scent. A baker's oven smells faintly of yesterday's bread. The air carries a hint of damp moss from nearby walls. You notice these things because there is room to notice. Psychologically, this slow passage of time allows your mind to anticipate rather than react. When events arrive at their natural moment without insistence, tension eases. The world seems larger, more breathable. A cart comes into view. You step aside and watch as it passes. The wheels grind softly against the street. The horse shifts its weight. The driver hums a tune under his breath. Waiting allows you to perceive the choreography of the mundane. Each movement has its place, its own rhythm. A well-known yet often forgotten fact: town criers rarely arrived at the same time twice. Citizens had to wait, sometimes for hours, for announcements of new laws, market schedules, or lost animals. But because waiting was constant, anticipation became predictable rather than stressful. An obscure note drifts in. In some towns, waiting was turned into a ritual of its own. Citizens might hum, murmur prayers, or perform subtle hand movements while standing in line, small repeated gestures to occupy idle hands. Historians still argue whether these were conscious coping strategies or spontaneous habit, but they offered a quiet, almost meditative engagement. You breathe slowly. The sun tilts toward afternoon, softening shadows. You realize that waiting teaches attention to subtlety. The swing of a gate, the scrape of shoes, the whisper of wind along a wall. Nothing startles. Nothing demands abrupt response. Time is soft, and your presence matches its softness. When the bell finally rings, you move with it, but you carry with you the unhurried patience of all the pauses before it, the gentle accumulation of observation and awareness that waiting allows. Life feels steadier, simpler, and curiously comforting. The world has not changed. You have only noticed it more closely. You notice bodies moving around you. Not in a hurried way, not in a way meant to impress, but simply existing. Hands washing, sleeves rolling, backs bending, hair being brushed. The day asks for small movements, repeated motions, gestures learned by muscle memory rather than thought. Every body seems to know its place, its function, its rhythm. The air is faintly warm, carrying scents of soap, smoke, and baked bread. You hear water splashing in a basin, the soft rustle of linen, the low murmur of voices that are neither urgent nor loud. Movements blend into a calm background hum, as if the room itself were breathing slowly. One well-known historical fact: early modern life did not separate the private and the public as rigidly as you might expect. Bathing, grooming, and other personal routines often occurred in semi-public spaces, shared courtyards, communal tubs, or multi-use rooms, because privacy was scarce and space precious. You observe, quietly, that the mind adapts. Exposure to the ordinary bodily functions of others does not provoke alarm. It normalizes human needs. When nothing is hidden, nothing becomes a source of stress. People can move, wash, dress, eat, and stretch without excess worry. and obscure detail surfaces. Chamber pots were emptied into streets or canals at designated times, often with the help of specialized porters or apprentices. This task, though unromantic to modern sensibilities, was performed methodically and expectedly. Historians still argue whether these routines shaped public tolerance or merely reflected necessity, but they created a predictable cadence to life. You lean against a wall, watching how humans interact with their own bodies in public creates a subtle reassurance. When others are comfortable, even in small ways, you sense that the environment is stable. The world does not threaten to collapse simply because nature is acknowledged. Psychologically, openness about the body promotes quiet confidence. There is less room for secret anxieties when bodily realities are visible and routine. You realize that your own small motions, the tug of a sleeve, the flexing of fingers, the shift of weight, fit into this shared choreography without fuss. A child passes nearby, adjusting a small apron over a dress, her movements precise and careful. An older apprentice sweeps nearby, bending and straightening in a measured rhythm. You notice the flow, the repetition, the predictability. A well-known but subtle fact: public exposure of natural acts was normalized in early modern towns, even in relatively refined households. People assumed others would see and adjust to such realities without fuss, and they did. There was no shame attached to the ordinary. An obscure note drifts softly into your awareness. In some urban centers, families and neighbors had tacit understanding zones, small areas where private tasks were semi-public, and community members would glance, nod, or hum in acknowledgement without comment. Historians still argue whether this fostered intimacy or simply minimized social friction, but it created an environment of gentle acceptance. You notice yourself adjusting slightly, mimicking the calm of those around you. Movement is neither hurried nor hesitant. The rhythm of bodies provides reassurance. The room, the street, the shared space, they have no need for tension. Life unfolds predictably, and your senses are attuned to it. By afternoon, the sun tilts low enough to cast long, soft shadows. People continue their small routines without awareness of time passing. You carry the subtle reassurance of this observation, that even in crowded, shared spaces, human life finds order through repetition and mutual awareness. The moment feels complete, not dramatic, just ordinary. And in this ordinary, you discover the quiet strength of shared human rhythm. You wait for words that arrive slowly. Letters travel at their own pace here, guided by horse, foot, or cart. You know they will come eventually. There is no expectation of immediacy. When a missive appears at the door, it does not startle. It simply exists, like a small piece of the day finally stepping forward. The room smells faintly of ink and parchment. The sunlight falls across the writing desk, highlighting scratches and stains from decades of use. A quill rests in a jar, still damp with last night's ink. You run your fingers lightly over it. Writing is slow. Reading is slower. Every word matters because the act itself requires attention. One well-known historical fact: postal services in early modern Europe were uneven, slow, and often unreliable. Letters could take weeks or months to arrive, depending on distance and circumstance. Communication was a test of patience as much as of intention. You open the envelope carefully. The paper is rough, the ink smudged in places. Each letter bears traces of travel, folds, stamps, perhaps a fingerprint. You read without haste. There is no need to respond immediately. The sender's words carry their own weight, independent of your action. An obscure detail drifts into the quiet. Envelopes were often sealed with wax pressed by a signet, a gesture both practical and ceremonial. Some people collected small fragments of wax over time, pressing them into scrapbooks as curiosities. Historians still argue whether this was an aesthetic choice or a subconscious desire to preserve contact, but it lent letters an unexpected texture. You notice the rhythm of patience settling over you. Waiting for correspondence teaches the mind that things can exist before they are handled. The delay allows anticipation to stretch, softening surprise and tempering expectation. The world moves in its own cadence, and you do too. Psychologically, delayed communication encourages reflection. You are not rushed to reply. You consider the words quietly, letting their meaning seep into thought rather than flash across it. Letters arrive when they wish, and in that you learn to accommodate time itself. You read aloud softly, though no one else is listening. The sound of your own voice is comforting. The inked words form a small bridge between you and someone else, stretching across space and days. Even if the meaning is mundane, requests for goods, notes of health, the passing of news, the act of receiving it feels like an anchor. A well-known but subtle fact: in some early modern towns, letters were read publicly first, especially announcements before private distribution. This created a gentle communal awareness of communication. You may have heard news before you read it yourself, but the repetition reinforced reliability rather than intrusiveness. An obscure quirk surfaces. Envelopes and letters were sometimes perfumed with herbs or flowers, intended to freshen long journeys or add subtle pleasure to reading. Historians still argue whether these scents were meant to comfort, impress, or preserve the ink, but they added a quiet layer of anticipation to the act. You place the letter aside. The room remains calm. The day continues. The absence of urgency allows you to linger in observation. Each letter, each word, each line carries the echo of distance traveled. Nothing demands immediate attention. The afternoon sun tilts toward early evening. Shadows lengthen and stretch across the floor. You notice how even light moves slowly, shaping the space like the gentle delivery of words. Patience softens the edges of life. You feel the quiet reassurance of delay, the subtle pleasure in knowing that communication can exist without compulsion. And as you fold the letter carefully, setting it aside to be reread later, you sense that some of the world's calm resides in things that arrive not too quickly, and that waiting itself can be a gentle companion. You notice the small rituals that give the day shape. No one announces them. They appear quietly, woven into life. A candle is trimmed. A window shutter is latched. A cloth is folded. A brush is run through hair. Each act is repeated with the same measured precision day after day, like a quiet heartbeat beneath the busyness of ordinary life. The air smells faintly of wax and dust. A breeze slips in through an open window, carrying the faint aroma of flowers, smoke, and damp stone. Light bends across surfaces, catching corners of objects that have existed in the same place for decades. You pause, taking it in. One well-known historical fact: early modern households often structured their days around repetitive rituals, both practical and symbolic. Meals, prayers, cleaning, and minor maintenance formed a predictable rhythm. Life was not unchanging, but the rituals provided gentle continuity, a way to know what came next. You watch someone performing a task. They do not hurry. Every motion is familiar, almost automatic. Yet there is care in it, a subtle attention that comes from repetition over years. Each gesture feels like a signal that the world is still functioning as expected, that nothing is amiss. An obscure detail surfaces. In some regions, families kept small ritual objects for daily use, like a particular brush, a stone for grinding herbs, or a tiny carved figure to be moved at the same time each morning. Historians still argue whether these were functional, superstitious, or psychological in purpose, but they created tiny anchors for attention and habit. You notice how comforting this is. Rituals reduce uncertainty. Even when life is difficult or unpredictable in larger terms, the repetition of small acts reassures the mind. You do not have to invent order. It is already present, available for your senses to align with. Psychologically, repeated rituals provide a gentle sense of mastery. The mind relaxes when it can predict outcomes, even small ones. Each fold of cloth, each flick of a candle, each careful brushstroke reassures you that the day is comprehensible and manageable, even if the wider world is not. A bell rings softly in the distance. Its sound is not urgent, just a reminder that the day is moving along its usual path. You return your attention to the ritual at hand. Perhaps a candle is lit, perhaps a dish is scrubbed. Nothing feels forced. Everything flows naturally. A well-known but subtle fact: in monasteries and some households, prayers and other small rituals were scheduled not only for devotion, but to structure the day so that work, rest, and meals were harmonized. Even secular homes borrowed this structure, finding comfort in repetition. An obscure quirk: some households synchronized minor actions with neighbors. Windows opened, laundry hung, or bread baked at similar times. Historians still argue whether this was conscious cooperation or simply a result of sunlight and shared resources. but the effect created an invisible rhythm connecting the community. You pause for a moment. The gentle hum of repeated human action surrounds you. Time moves forward, not abruptly, but with a kind of understated choreography. Life is held together by small, repeated gestures. You carry a sense of ease just by watching and participating in this steady flow. And as evening approaches, the rituals continue quietly, unchanged in purpose, but softening the edges of the day. They form a network of familiarity that stretches beyond the household, binding you to the world around you in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. You notice the evening before it fully arrives. Light softens into a muted amber, spilling through windows and alleys, catching dust motes in its lazy, golden drift. Shadows lengthen, stretching across walls and floors with a deliberate slowness, as if the day itself is yawning. Sounds become gentler, more distant, footsteps softer, voices quieter, the scraping of a cart over cobblestones more hesitant. The day has been lived in increments of repetition, ritual and gentle attention, and now it eases into closure without fanfare. You pause at a doorway, letting your gaze travel across the street, across the room, across the subtle movements of people tidying, arranging, preparing for night. No one hurries. No one is behind schedule. Evening arrives with patience, not insistence. One well-known historical fact: in early modern Europe, household evenings often began long before modern clocks dictated bedtime. Candles were lit as dusk deepened, fires rekindled for warmth, and simple dinners or light snacks were shared before the family or household settled in for sleep. The rhythm was organic, not forced. You notice the small oddities of preparation for the night. A candle is dipped just so, leaving tiny trails of wax. A chair is pulled closer to the hearth. Clothes are folded with precision that seems unnecessary, yet feels profoundly satisfying. The day closes itself in the way a book might close if you left it on the shelf, spine slightly worn, familiar and comforting. An obscure detail: in some households, people placed stones or small charms near windows or doors during evening routines. These objects were intended less as superstition than as habitual markers, signaling that the day had reached its natural end. Historians still argue whether this was ritual, psychology, or practicality, but the objects quietly punctuated daily life. Psychologically, the dimming of light and the predictable movements of others foster a sense of calm. Your mind can release its attention gradually. There is no sudden call to action, no abrupt transition. The environment itself becomes a lullaby, each subtle motion and soft glow reinforcing safety and continuity. You hear footsteps fading down the hall. A door closes softly. A fire crackles in its small hearth. The smell of wood smoke mingles with fading bread or herbs left from earlier meals. There is no hurry to extinguish the day. It allows itself to linger, stretching its presence into quiet spaces. A well-known but delicate fact: In towns without reliable street lighting, households relied on candlelight, oil lamps, or moonlight, all of which cast shadows that softened rather than sharpened the edges of objects. Life in this gentle chiaroscuro created an atmosphere where sharp distinctions of day and night were blurred, allowing for a more gradual transition of perception. An obscure quirk: in some communities, evening was the preferred time for small social visits, whispered storytelling, or exchanging minor news. Historians still argue whether this was practicality or preference, but it created an unhurried shared rhythm that lingered long after the sun had set. You settle into the final moments of the day. The room exhales slowly around you. You sink slightly into a chair or onto a mattress. Hands rest where they will. Eyes close for just a moment, then open to notice the dim amber, the softened shadows, the subtle warmth of a hearth or candle flame. Every sense is gently engaged, not startled. The world has not ended. It simply folds itself into itself, quietly, predictably. Light and sound recede, motion slows, and your body adjusts to the subtle rhythms of night. There is no abrupt conclusion, only a soft dimming, a gentle retreat into stillness. You notice your own breath matching the slow cadence of the evening. The faintest noises, the smallest flickers of light, the quiet movements of others, all lull you toward rest. The day has been observed, experienced, accepted. The world continues, but it does so in a hushed, measured way. And as your eyelids grow heavier, the final thought is nothing more than the comfort of continuity. That this day, like many before it, will fade slowly, kindly, predictably, leaving the mind untroubled, the body relaxed, and the senses softened in a gentle, timeless hush. The day drifts away, quietly, without demand. Night arrives not with alarm, but with a calm, patient ease, as if the world itself is whispering, "It is safe to rest."